Good afternoon and welcome to another LinkedIn Live session on Curriculum Storyboards. So I am thrilled to have Benna Kalik,
Hi.
our Curriculum Storyboards consultant and coach, as well as welcome to the party, Chrissie Zavicar, who usually is behind the scenes organizing all of this. But she is actually now the featured speaker in our conversation today, talking about a little bit about the process that she used in the design and the development of storyboards and how it actually impacted and shaped her thinking, as well as imagining what the impact it might be on the students she's working with. So welcome, Chrissie. Good to have you again.
I feel like I've made it to the big time and I'm actually on with you guys.
That's right. So thank you for actually taking a responsible and creative risk by turning around and doing this with your outline. So can you give us a little bit of background information, Chrissie? Talk a little bit about what you are doing in connection to this entrepreneurial program.
Absolutely. So I have a background in professional sports. So I worked for the Detroit Lions for a decade, which plays into the fact that my current business partner is Herman Moore. He was a all-pro wide receiver with the team before I got there. And so we're now business partners in Stack Brands. And one of the things that we do together is entrepreneurship programs. And so we've had a couple of programs where we've worked with, I got to put myself in the main spot. Okay. We've had I forgot.
You're just used to being backstage, Chrissie. We know.
I know. So we've had a couple of programs already where we've had a group of young people go through the process where they actually get to choose a product and create their brand from start to finish. And we walk them through what it means to be an entrepreneur and have their own business. So we've done that a few times and we're still going to be offering it.
So when you're starting to think about that, first of all, just paint us a little more of a picture. So when you're talking about young people, grade level ranges that you're after or age ranges?
Yep. So we're looking at high school age. Ideally, when we're doing the products, if we're going to be doing things ongoing, it's actually better to be 18 or older because then you don't have to deal with parental permission, which can make it a little bit sticky. But we've done programs typically 14 and up. So it'll be young people who are interested in creating their own brands. And it's really fun to engage them around the topic because you just dig into what they're excited about and they just really can get into the process and get inquisitive and curious about it. So it's fun.
Other things in terms of painting that picture. So is this an after school? Is it a weekend program? Is it virtual? Is it on-site?
So, and this is where it gets interesting that ultimately we led up to developing the storyboard. So the first one we did was completely in person. It was a part of a grant program, and it was a both the ones that we did were about like a summer youth program. So it was as though they were being employed to do the business development. So the first one we did, it was completely in person. And then we were developing the brands and bringing it to them for their own iterations. And then the second time we did it, there were changes that were made based on what went well and what didn't go well. So we actually ended up doing a in-person session with a follow-up virtual session so that we could do, feedback and all of that for the second one. So it became kind of hybrid, I guess.
Okay. And so one of the reasons why I'm starting to think about these questions for you, because Chrissie, the power of what you're doing is something that is situated within that kind of high school age range, 14 to 18, but also the power of engaging in conversation with you is that potentially starting to move out of just the education space and step back and start to think about in what ways does the storyboarding process actually impact the type of engagement, that preview of the learning experience and the interaction as folks, whether they are students or they're employees or they are volunteers, where they can continue to see and interact and experience the deep level of opportunity, the opportunity to sort of think through skills, as well as that notion of relevant application as a result of the experience. So anybody that wants to chime in, again, ask a question, please feel free, as Chrissie and Ben and I are starting to engage in the conversation around how Chrissie started to create a storyboard for her entrepreneurial program. So back to the picture again, Chrissie. So can you talk about why curriculum storyboards, why storyboards in general for this particular project? Because I know you've been behind the scenes for a while. What made you want to actually step back and really dive deep into the design of this?
Absolutely. So I am a marketer, and when you are marketing something that is very popular, that people are excited about, it is a really fun thing to engage. And so I've been having so much fun with curriculum storyboards because people are so excited about it. And as I've been listening to everybody's feedback when they're talking about storyboards, I was recognizing that the storyboard itself could solve an issue that I was having, or issues that I was having, because I was having the same problems I was hearing them talk about. So for example, I have so much content and I don't know how to, and I keep using the word streamline naturally. So I suppose that's the right word for your book. So just streamlining my content, because when you're doing entrepreneurship, you've got an 8-week program and you're saying, okay, so we can cover finance, legal, marketing, product creation, website, e-commerce, all these different things you can cover in 8 weeks. What the heck am I going to actually put in it so that it all connects and we're not just throwing things at them? And also, how do we get what we need out of the program? And so I have so many documents that I would start and then add to, and then I'd start a new one, and then I'd have different worksheets, and I'd have all these different things. And as I'm listening to all of this about storyboards, I'm like, I'm going to use a storyboard for this. And the process itself of creating it was probably more enlightening than the end result, because the process helped me organize the information in a way that, okay, now I know concisely how I can execute this program in 8 weeks, what we need to do. And it just takes out all of this extra gunk that I'm like needing to worry about what I'm going to say and do on a weekly basis with the participants.
So when you say that the process of it really was something that helped you to clarify, do you feel like you needed to sort of dump out all the stuff that was on your mind before you got to that process? How did all that work together?
So I don't know if I used the storyboard as other people typically would, because I've heard people talk about what they started with. I started with the learning targets. Well, actually, no, I started with what I needed the people to have at the end. So I'm going, okay, we need them to have a product. So they need to have created a logo. They need to have created their own brand. So I started with, what do we need them to have completed by the end?
Okay, so I'm going to just stop you there, Chrissie, because I think one thing, as people are tuning into the conversation, when Chrissie is starting to say, I'm not sure if I did it right, I want to clarify that there's no onboarding approach. So there are multiple ways to onboard. And Chrissie, what you started to describe right now is an absolutely such a powerful way to onboard, thinking about what's the deliverable at the end of the experience, what kind of authentic products, creations do we want as a result of their experience? So that notion of authentic assessment, as we talk about in the book Heidi and I did in episode 7, really is speaking to exactly what Chrissie's describing right now. So, all right, Chrissie, keep going.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if this is something, because I'm not a traditional teacher, so I don't know if this is something that teachers struggle with as well. But as I'm looking through an 8-week program, when we're developing the brands, there's this very tight time frame that we have to get them to learn what a brand is. I mean, they already know in general, but we have to cover what a brand is. Then they have to conceptualize what they want for their brand. So they need to have some time to do that. Then they have to present ideas. And then we have to go back and forth with art, Like, what are we going to create? Do they like it? Do they not like it? So there's this back and forth process of creating a logo, then creating designs, then creating their product samples that they might get and send back. So it's a very tight window. So to be able to look at, this is what I need to have completed, and then map it out accordingly with this process really helped me feel like I might be alleviating some stress the next time I go through this, because I actually was able to think through, okay, by this week we can get this done and turn it around, and et cetera, et cetera. So I was just very excited about the whole thing.
When you say that it helped you to relieve your stress, I'm curious to know, what do you think it did for the students when you presented it?
So we haven't done this one yet, but I presented it to the individuals that we're looking to do the next program with. And even me looking at, I was so excited. So even me looking at it, I'm going, I know what we're covering, and this makes me excited as a person that's going to be overseeing it and help facilitating it. And the same thing with the people receiving it, it helps them understand what would they be participating in. So there's an excitement there that they're not just getting this laundry list of text that's in a proposal or this is what our course could be, but it's this very concise, putting together of what the program is. And then I also was thinking through like generations, Gen Z, let's make sure the icons, would speak to like a Gen Z audience and that they would understand what we're talking about. So I just thought through that process. So I'm really excited actually to get the feedback of the storyboard itself, but my business partner loved it. So that's a positive.
But it sounds like what really excited you a lot was just the very process of putting it together and telling it like a story and finding the right images. I know one of the first things that you asked when I looked at it was, so which image do you think is my favorite? So it was obviously like, oh, this is an exciting thing. Can you guess which one excites me? And I was thinking, I'm curious to know that. And I'm also curious to know which one am I curious about? So I started looking at them and studying them also. There was something about the visuals in it that really got you feeling extra excited. Talk a little bit about that.
So I think, Chrissie, it would probably be helpful to pull up the storyboard. So that way for people that are just joining the party now on whatever social media platform you're on, Facebook, X, LinkedIn Live. So can you take a look at these visuals as Benna started to describe and lean in on, and start to think through what your thought process was as well in terms of the selection of them? Because I know this is an area that many educators are just trying to figure out, where do I come up with great ideas?
Here's my masterpiece. Yay. So, so I will say also, when I was developing it, ChatGPT was definitely my friend, which I already have used AI, but just the ability to ask, like, this is what I want my learning target to be. How do I state it to a high school student concisely? So that was really helpful. I do use ChatGPT also as a thought partner. So I'll ask, what would be a good image for a Gen Z high schooler as it pertains to this? Ultimately, that really didn't work out for me very well. I ended up just having to it was more of like an iterative process where I would just search for something and go, I'm not really feeling that. And then I would continue just thinking it through. So for example, the first one that I picked, hands down, was the money one. Because I'm like, really, is it that difficult to just find something exciting about money? And that was one that I thought too, we're all going to be inspired by money. So why wouldn't, students get excited to see, a windfall of money? So that was the first one that I did. For the other ones, it was really about what's going to speak to the end user so that they get excited about what it is. And something I've heard people you've interviewed before talk about is that it allows you to get excited about the teaching. So I am a teacher at heart, whether it's traditional or helping people with their marketing or teaching something like this. And be able to talk about the content is what's really fun and exciting. And so I think the imagery was a part of conveying it's a way I could connect with the individuals that would be participating, that they would get excited. So I'm thinking about my 13-year-old who's in that generation and what would speak to her. Well, creating your content, if I had a like movie camera, that's really probably not going to speak to your students as much as you have your smartphone on a tripod and you and your friend are creating content. And to be honest, that's what we would be asking them to do or thinking through when they're doing marketing of their product. They're going to be marketing to their peers and their family through social more than likely. They're not going to be creating a TV commercial. So what is it that, what can help communicate what we'll be asking them to do at that point in a relevant way? So that's where I started to kind of think through the different images.
Lovely. And I think the interesting part is that when you're starting to play out those ideas for images, please take a look that the unit title, the image, and the focus of the story should be very complementary with one another. So when you are placing an image underneath the title, it starts to give you more insight as to what should the title be to make sure that this image comes alive. The other thing that I've been finding over this past week when I was working in Denton ISD in Texas is that we started to play with the metaphor or the idea of what that image represents. So you're trying to take a nod like with a verb choice, for example. So the idea of we dive deeper because there was a diving board as that image up on top. So to continue to think about how the focus of the story continues to be informed and enlivened by some clear, but also playful, precise word choices.
And something interesting about that too is that if you look at the different titles, so you'll see there's a clear alliteration and theme until you get to the last one. Mm-hmm. So I definitely hate coming up with titles. So I 100% utilize AI for titles. And so I was like, oh, I'll just do, the brand and then follow up. And it fit. And then for the last one, there were some different words I played with. It's like brand bonanza, like brand, and then I'm going, but this would mean nothing to the student. And knowing that in this generation, it's all about product drops. Like it's all about brands that they follow and they do a quick product drop for a limited amount of time. You have to jump on it and then it comes out. So I'm thinking product drop is something that they'll actually understand as opposed to something abstract that fits with the alliteration. So I changed it to make it to where it actually fit something that would make sense as opposed to trying to make it perfect across the board. No pun intended.
Well, I also so much appreciate the idea of continuing to write this for your target audience, because that is something else that Benna and Heidi and myself continue to emphasize, that we're not writing it just for ourselves to organize and lay out the content of a particular course or learning module or experience. We are writing it directly for our target audience, in which case, in your view, is 14 to 18-year-olds. But the interesting dynamic is that sometimes when we start to get super lost in that, but it has to have like the following that BB, like brand, and then finish it. Oftentimes that alliteration can continue to actually sow more confusion than help. So we can start to see the thread, and then in this case, a particular drop of that thread, because it's like pow, like the idea of doing something dynamic to demonstrate that we're moving away from the alliteration because we're actually engaging in this kind of entrepreneurial drop. Benna, what are you thinking as you're starting to see the images and the titles?
Well, I was actually listening more to what Chrissie was saying as her process, because I find it very intriguing, because I think that it really basically, she started off with like a mess of ideas. And she said, okay, how am I going to figure out what to do that's going to just make it streamlined? But then as you started to look at the visuals, and then you went to ChatGPT, I love the question you asked, like, what would it be right for this age group, so that you were getting very specific. And you started to see this. But what I also heard was you qualified everything by saying it's not perfect, But on the other hand, that lack of imperfection is what made it so charming, because you were able to move away from saying everything has to be alliterating, and you were able to say, oh, well, this really works because it speaks to the kids, and I'm sure they'll get it. That giving yourself permission to not be perfect seemed like a big deal in your creative process.
Yes, yes. And I'm so, and truly, I'm so excited to be able to hand this to a student. And I could honestly talk probably for an hour about what this particular thing has done to help me, which is fascinating that it is just this thing is helping me so much, because to have been the person who oversaw the program multiple times and to know the overload of work that I have to do to turn all of this around, I literally was able to take what I put together in the storyboard and then extract it and put it into a document. And then I could go, okay, well, this is what we're covering. Remind myself, what do we need to actually get done to complete these things? And then I start putting the tactical items. We have to complete this. And it's just, and then it will keep us also on point. So Herman and I are both excited business people. We have a lot of information to share, and we get excited when we're talking. This will also keep us on point. Don't go into week 5 yet. We're not there. Stick with week 1. This is what we're covering. So to remove confusion from students, both from we get the understanding of what we're doing at the outset, but also, oh, this is what we're covering. Okay, this makes sense. So yes, just I think the excitement of the tool itself, it kept me from needing to be rigid with it. It was just, I understood the utility of it. I was just really excited to have something actually guide me and make it so much easier.
So what Chrissie also is starting to clarify is that you can also read this as a preview of the course so that kids can get energized and excited about starting and moving through an experience. But what Chrissie is speaking to now is that it's a pacing guide for the person that is facilitating and leading the course. In other words, you can actually take the details of this storyboard and then lay it out from a more management type experience. So if in weeks 3 and 4, for example, for brand budget, if this is the overview and these are the learning targets, what do I'm thinking about Herman as well, what do we need to do to get ready? So what are our sort of asks to get ready for this experience? And how are we going to engage the 14 to 18-year-olds to help move through that experience? And then where are we bridging to next so that we have our eyeballs or our foresight into what week 5 looks like to continue to make sure that within the weeks 3 and 4, we're dropping a little bit of like an insight or a nugget as to when we head to the next piece, this is the bridge or the connecting thread that you can potentially think about and move into that experience.
Absolutely. And okay, there's so many things I could say. So I'll start with, I don't know which one I want to start with. So a couple things. So one, and you can tell me which one you want me to go in more. So first of all, the bolded items in the focus of the story, I'm like overwhelmingly jazzed and excited about, for I'm not sure what reason, but very excited. And then the other thing that from a tactical standpoint that was really good is that the space that I have to work with kept me in check. So for example, when it came to the learning targets, it actually made sure I was thinking at a high enough level, because I would put in like 3 of them and then I'm like, well, that doesn't fit. And I actually use ChatGPT for that. So I go, what can embody all of these? Which was funny because sometimes ChatGPT would just create a run-on sentence that included everything I put. I'm like, I could do that, ChatGPT. But it made me go higher with my learning target so that it was more all-encompassing. I didn't have to get into a specific, I know how to make a logo. No, we can just say, I can identify what makes up a brand. So that was really helpful there.
So just real quick, for people that are just joining in, and again, if you want to ask a question or offer a comment so we can continue to interact with that, please feel free.
You there, Brenna?
I'm here.
Starting to
All right,
look.
you go ahead.
Oh, so I guess what I'm really intrigued with is how you've managed to take an awful lot of material, bring it to something that was very exciting, not only to you, but you can see how exciting this would be to the students as well. And that it helped you to really stay focused. But what always intrigues me is the creative process, because in a way, what people often forget is to be creative, you need to have enough of a box that you understand in order to allow the explosion of creativity. So in each one of these things, you're expecting the students to have that box of here's what we're expecting you to work within, so that you can come up with a dozen wonderful ideas of how to make this happen. And that seems to be the way I read your storyboard.
Yes, and there's a passion for teaching that's involved also. Like, for example, the one that my eye keeps going to and that I absolutely loved was the all shirts are not created equal, because having gone through this process with students, they didn't understand, well, if you get this shirt, your profit is a lot lower than if you get this shirt, and having to understand product cost. And it's making sure that we cover that, because sometimes you get far and you go, oh, we didn't take the time to cover that back here. So then maybe we're going back and it's confusing, or we're just adding an addendum at that point. So to make sure that this is a key focus of your budget. So, originally we might go over a budget and say, these are line items of a budget. This is what a cost is, et cetera. But having the experience too of the prior programs and knowing, we got to make sure that they know that when they're selecting their items to put their designs on, it matters what they select, because it's going, like some students, well, I want this cut of a sweatshirt. Okay, well, it's literally going to cost us $35 to make that, which means you're going to have to charge probably at least $50, if not more, to make significant money to make it worth your while, or you're going to lose money. So that concept of entrepreneurship is extremely important to understand when you're working through that process. It's not just a matter of, oh, I sell a shirt, someone gives me $20. Yay, I made $20. No, a lot of things went into creating that shirt to sell. You might sell it for $20 and technically you made $3.50 or you made $5. So that's a really important piece. And so I don't know what it is about the titles. You can probably articulate it better than I can, but it just got me excited about, yes, we're going to be covering that. And we're going to be out prepared to cover that part. And they're going to understand that. So, yeah.
It sounds to me like you not only did this storyboard, but you already have another 4.
Yes. And I actually did create another one for young students, for elementary age. And with that one, that was also interesting, because it was a matter of taking this program, what actually would fit for an elementary age student, because obviously they're not going to go through this entrepreneurship program. So what I actually ended up doing was taking in this, what would be weeks 1 and 2, and making that an entire program. Yeah. So helping them understand what is your personal brand and what does that mean through the lens of a 6 to 10-year-old. So it's like, when the way I, talk, the things I like, the words I use, that makes up my personal brand. So that was really what made up that one.
And I'm sorry, my internet was a little squirrely. One of the things that I was originally going to say a few minutes ago is the idea of this graphic design layout that Chrissie is sharing with you is something that our graphic designer designed for us as part of the Storyboards brand. And if you're interested and you'd like to see and get access to that Google slide template, go ahead and head to the Curriculum Storyboard site so that you can subscribe to our newsletter. And that'll be one of the giveaways that we're sharing in the next couple of weeks. But the other part of really starting to think about the small space for the learning targets, it's deliberately designed that way. It's not supposed to mean that you're reducing the font size to like 5 or 6 point. But at the other part of it is like starting to actually work directly in this Google Slide experience to like put things in there is perhaps not necessarily the only way into it. So one thing that I personally recommend is just starting with like just a blank document or a Google table with learning targets, and you can write, or focus of the story, you can write as long as you'd like, but then you're stepping back and saying, what really do I care about? And I think this is what Chrissie has been speaking to so beautifully throughout this conversation today. What really matters? How does that directly connect to the deliverable that they're going to be experiencing at the end of week 2 in relation to the product drop? So the continued focus on the deliverable, as Chrissie started to say that was her way into the design, but also starting to think about how we're bridging this from one week to another, from one collection of learning targets to another, to make sure that we are being as clear and focused, as well as it's something where we're building their capacity over time from week 1 to week 8.
Yes. And what you said about the space for the learning targets, I think that's something that just spoke to the brilliance of what you and Heidi did, is the fact that the way you outlined it forces people to do certain things that make sense for the curriculum. So I thought that was fabulous. And I have my other storyboard if you want me to share it.
Sure, yeah. Absolutely. And while you're pulling that up, I mean, it also reminds me of the old school Twitter, back in the days when it was founded, with the limitation on characters. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that that forces your creative thinking. So instead of writing a run-on message with like quick little bites, you're actually stepping back and starting to say, how can I use this medium to effectively communicate my thinking without doing so many abbreviations that the audience loses any kind of clarity on what you're after in the first place?
Yes.
So let's just take a look at this example in terms of personal brand. So we did start to see that the origin story was that week 1 and week 2, correct? And so starting to think about that for elementary students as an audience. So age range, Chrissie?
6 to 10.
Okay, fantastic. So in terms of creative process, I also know you've got a couple of kiddos at home. So they may also have been part of your wheelhouse of your creative juice in terms of involving them in the experience. But walk us through, Chrissie, what was your process in this one?
So this one was fascinating because it kind of stretched my if I was a teacher legs, in the sense that I had to do more research for how could I engage 6 to 10-year-olds in this content in a way that was relevant while addressing a certain learning target. So it actually stretched me in terms of you're not actually teaching the literal what you're teaching the skill. And so that changed my viewpoint, and I had to do research as far as like and I do ask ChatGPT instead of Google often, what can I do to engage a 6 to 10-year-old in personal brand, this, that, or the other. So like for some of these, it's not in here, but the plan was maybe to do like a charades where they had to do a personal brand and act out something in their personal brand, and then you had to guess the words and things like that. It is fun just for everybody to know that if you do use ChatGPT and you ask a question, like, is there a exercise I can do, and then ask the question, ChatGPT is really excited about it and will make you feel really good about yourself because it'll answer absolutely, and then it gives you the answer. So you just feel really wonderful about the whole thing as you're talking to ChatGPT. So for this, that was really the biggest thing, was actually thinking through what skills could we cultivate in different exercises that would be fun and engaging for 6 to 10-year-olds, because the 6 to 10-year-old doesn't really care about designing a logo. It's not really what they're
Well, you know what really intrigues me about this one is that I'm doing a large project in New York City with in Jackson Heights with kids who are a lot of immigration population. And one of the biggest questions is, how do you help them to show their identity? How do you help them to say, who am I in this world, given the fact that I've come from another world and it's kind of surprising to even be here? And how do I get included? And how do I feel like I belong? So I would take my personal brand to that school and I would say, wow, what a great activity for helping kids to say, who am I in this classroom at this moment in the world that I'm in? So thank you. I'm going to copy it.
Please take it. And so to let you know too, the origin or a lot of where I'm coming from with it is when we come from sports too. Herman does a lot of speaking about how your personal brand is so important. It's not just about what you do on a football field. It's going to be what you say to individuals, how you present yourself online and on social media, and what are your interests. It all plays into your personal brand. And it's important to think that through. What is my personal brand? So then also, what aligns with it and what doesn't. And that is so, I love what you said about using it for that, because it was a concept of charades. So let's act out like what is, pick a couple things that were part of the brand. And I can give you the activities that I came up with too.
Yeah.
But it would be like, they can come up with different elements, and then in groups they could choose, all right, well, we're going to act out, I love Bluey, right? So then we'll act out somehow, figure that out. But making it to where you could act out your favorite activity or act out something like that, and everybody's guessing. And so it's more of a game.
Well, and what else is so fascinating is the idea or the notion of personal brand. Yes, it's incredibly important from a sports related field, but I think it's also right now, as Bennett was describing, this is part of our identity. It's a way to continue to express who I am and how I want to present myself to the world. And the notion that your personal brand is designed to evolve over time. So it's not necessarily static. And so the idea of continuing to think about this, not just for 6 to 10-year-olds, but also thinking about how our own identities and brands continue to evolve and change and deepen over time. And the way that we sort of interact and engage with the world continues to inspire our next, iteration of what we want to contribute, of who we are, and how we continue to make magic happen in the world.
Absolutely. And I'm in one of the learning targets, and I'm developing this and thinking about how this is just good for life. I can understand how I want others to feel when they see or experience my brand. So how do you want other people to receive you? How do you want them to feel, with the way that you're coming across? And so there's just different ways to think about, it's kind of a creative or kind of different way to think about how we are with others.
So I also want to cycle back to something that you said very early on in the conversation, in terms of not just the process that you used in terms of thinking and creating this, but the impact it had on you and potentially Herman and who you started to share it with. So while the curriculum, the storyboards that you've developed have not been shared with students yet, but we would love to actually have you come on board once you've shared it and you worked your way through to start to see the impact it had in the learning experience. The moment that you do have clarity on is how it actually helped with communicating the message as to why a particular organization might want to fund or support this particular work. So can you tie in that part a little bit in terms of that impact on satellite audiences that are deeply connected to the work you do with students?
Yes, and let me bring up the other one. So there's a few things. First of all, there's excitement even before showing it, just having worked with students before, knowing that, wow, if they had seen this, things might have been a bit more clear, because they're showing up going, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? So it would be helpful. I already know it's going to make an impact. For us, it makes it so that I now have this and can just take it in perpetuity as I keep going. Now I have a program. And I'm like, I have a program on one page. I can just go hand this to somebody and they understand my program. I don't have to sit there and do a whole stump speech about why you should like it and what it is. All of a sudden, you can just take one glance at this and you actually can see what it is that we're doing. The other thing is, as you're talking about stakeholders and sponsors, one of the things that we definitely want to do and what has driven interest from certain organizations is you can have sponsors or presenters that fit in each of these sections. So you can bring in a financial organization or somebody that wants to do financial literacy, and they can be your sponsor for that week, or they can be a sponsor overall with their teaching that week. Same thing with, you want to bring in a content creator or a manufacturer of different products. So it allows stakeholders to say, you know, we would love to be a part of this area and, you know, be your title sponsor for the whole program or for this particular week. And then we can be worked into the content and tagged and all of that.
So Benna, I think if you want to talk a little bit about when you're starting to use this with students and the interactions and the ways of having folks actually not just look at this as a preview and generate excitement, but from whether it's 14, 18-year-olds or whether it's the elementary storyboard, what are some of the strategies that we've started to design around to make it so that kids are now actually part of the story?
Yeah, well, I think that what excites me about it, and this one would be just a perfect example of it, would be I'd love to be a student in this class. I really would. In fact, I'm sure you would love me to be a student in this class because I'd be a much better business person. But one of the things I would say about it is that as a student in the class, I'd like to interact with this. So I'd like to tell you how I'm thinking about what you thought I ought to be thinking about when you wrote the focus of the story. So one of the questions that would come right away to me is, okay, so you said that this is important, and here's you told me all the why for it. Now I just had the experience. Let me tell you what I got from it. And I think it would be very interesting to say, you know, by the time I'm in week 3, you know, I really thought it was pretty boring to do the first one, but then I started getting into it. And right now what I realize is I had to do the first one to get to the second one to get to where I am right now.
Yeah.
By the time I get to the product drop, I want to celebrate. And it just would give me the opportunity to tell you, here's all the stuff that I learned from this and all the ways that I can imagine using it. So it seems to me also, because of what this particular storyboard does, it sort of helps you to think about who you are as a person who manages a project. Because in a way, that's what you're asking me to do. How do I manage a project? So I guess another thing that I'd love to be able to have a student think about is, now that you went through this, not only what did it tell you about becoming an entrepreneur, but what does it also tell you about being a project manager, for example? And how would this then translate? So I guess it's what we call transfer, which is how does this transfer to other situations and grow you? And I love what you said, because after you finished it, you thought, well, there is a transfer of this. It's not just the tool that started to transfer. It was the realization of the way that this communicates that started to transfer for you. So that you then started to look at it and say, okay, I get this, because I see that it not only is good for the upper grade students, but I also see that this is something that young kids can do. It's that the tool sparks the thinking, and then the thinking starts to make that tool even more useful.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And also thinking through, because we also do this for, I don't want to say grown-ups, but for established entrepreneurs who are actual adults. And this would be the same, potentially the same content, but I wouldn't present it this way. I would change the imagery. I would change the language, because now I'm speaking to business owners. So there would be a different way to position it, even if it's the exact same content. So you're absolutely right, Benna, in terms of, and that's what was so fascinating and exciting for me, I think, is, okay, I already knew what this could do for me, but now that I'm using it, I'm even getting more out of it because of, laying it out and thinking it through. So, yes.
So when we're starting to think about like the power of the designer of this and the impact and the ripple effect and the transfer, as Benna was chatting a moment or two ago, you can continue to actually sharpen your use of the tool, not just because of your experience, but also sort of the energy and the insight that you get from the process. But so too, that same kind of potential opportunity for students, for participants, whether they're adults or whether they're in fourth grade, for them too to actually start to be engaged in the story so far. So as Benna was describing a moment or two ago, offering a couple of reflective prompts for students to think about underneath weeks 1 and 2 is an example. In another school district I was working with last week, they actually were starting to see this as a way of collecting artifacts. So in other words, this curriculum storyboard actually gets exported to each individual in the class, and then they have a space where they can upload a folder in which their artifact for the first 2 weeks of sketching out a blueprint, so that we can also start to see that the accumulation of artifacts continues to help sharpen not just their product drop, but also their view around what will my personal brand stand for, and how am I growing as an entrepreneur throughout this experience. So those are just 2 small strategies to continue to make sure that the impact is not just something that kids are leaning into and energized about. They can actually start to interface with this as well to continue to reflect and sharpen their own thinking and metacognition as a result. So closing words for you, Chrissie. So in terms of thinking about the power of curriculum storyboards, as you've experienced a couple of these storyboards so far now as a designer, what's one insight or aha that will continue to fuel your next iteration of things?
I 100% expect that when we go through the program again, there will be changes, and even the ones we did already affected what I put into the storyboard. For example, when we did our last program, creating content was not a part of it. And then they did it on their own. So we didn't encourage, we didn't talk about creating content. They created their own business social accounts. They created their own flyers, and they started promoting their vendor day on their own without us. And so just recognizing what would they be motivated to do? What would they get excited to do? And then working that in and continuing to iterate, how will this flow in the best way? So just recognizing that.
Benna, closing thoughts based on our conversation this afternoon?
I just think it's very exciting to see it being used in this way. And it just occurs to me that I want to grab this one and make it my project management tool, because it really is project management.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the insight is that, first of all, Chrissie, it's just so fabulous to have you go from the behind the scenes and making everything happen around curriculum storyboards to actually being in front of the camera and starting to think about, in what ways did that impact my own professional design and work with the audience that you work with. And one of the insights that I'm taking away from this conversation is that it's the story so far. This is something that Benna and I have chatted about for a couple of years around the burgeoning of the idea of curriculum storyboards, that we are all works in progress. Our stories are also works in progress. So the opportunity all throughout this conversation, Chrissie, where you said it's not perfect, and Benna said it's not designed to be perfect. And I think the utmost importance is that we have a level of grace in our creative thinking and imagining and communicating, but we also continue to be inspired by who we're sharing it with as an audience. And when you start to see what kids are doing as a result of this, that may actually inform what the next iteration of the curriculum storyboard looks like. Or perhaps you might have a high school entrepreneurship part 2, or you might have an immersive experience where you're doing job shadowing. The world's your oyster, but you're actually doing that in partnership with the learners and in partnership with the supporters of the program. So it's been such a joy and a privilege and a pleasure to have the two of you on a Wednesday, rainy afternoon here. So I am Allison Zmuda, author of Streamlining the Curriculum with Heidi Hayes Jacobs. And for more information, you can go ahead and head over to our Curriculum Storyboard site, where you'll see the fabulous Benna Calic and myself interacting on several blog posts. You can also start to see the events and what's upcoming if you want to join us in a virtual or an on-site experience, or go ahead and purchase the book. And all of that information is on the site. So thank you again, and good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.